Okay, let's jump right into this one because it is a fascinating puzzle. Today, we're unpacking a really intricate sermon by Pastor Stephen Wilholt where he decodes the profound literary and theological parallels woven right into the biblical account of the burial of Jesus. He draws this absolutely astonishing straight line between the very first pages of Genesis and the closing chapters of the Gospel of John. So get ready, because we're going to be looking at the text through a completely new lens in today's explainer. To set the stage, Pastor Wilhoit opens with an analogy that, honestly, hits a little too close to home. Have you ever had to retrace your steps? You know that feeling when you're about to leave for a crucially important meeting. You reach into your pocket and nothing. Your keys are just completely gone. Instant panic, right? Well, what do? You go back to the beginning. You have to retrace your steps, trying to pinpoint the exact moment and location where you lost them. And the sermon brilliantly applies this incredibly mundane, everyday occurrence to the overarching human condition. So the foundational theological premise here is this. Humanity, according to the biblical narrative, basically lost its metaphorical keys. Only in this case, the lost item wasn't car keys, it was purity, it was righteousness. And where exactly was it lost? Right there in the ancient Garden of Eden. But here's the massive dilemma we're presented with. We as humanity are completely unable to just walk back and retrace our steps to that garden to get back what we lost. We're lucked out. So humanity desperately needs a stand-in. We need someone who can retrace those steps for us. Keep that in the back of your mind as we look at the historical events unfolding right after the crucifixion. Which brings us to Section 1, the secret disciples emerge, stepping into the light. Right away, the narrative pivots to the highly anomalous, frankly incredibly risky behavior of two powerful men who suddenly step out of the shadows, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Now, these guys aren't your typical everyday followers. They are wealthy, politically connected elites. In fact, they're members of the Sanhedrin Council, literally the very ruling authority that just orchestrated the crucifixion of Jesus. Pastor Wilhoit points out that Joseph actually dissented from the council's decision, but up until this exact moment, he had kept his faith entirely in the dark out of pure fear. He was a secret disciple. But then, boom, a dramatic shift happens. Joseph steps right into the light and publicly asks the Roman governor, Pilate, for the body of Jesus. By making this bold, highly public move, Joseph is risking his entire reputation, all his political clout, and quite possibly his own life. I mean, you don't just casually stroll up to a Roman governor and ask for the body of a crucified man without drawing intense, dangerous scrutiny. His actions signal a massive shift in allegiance. He is publicly submitting to what the sermon describes as a new king. And that leads perfectly into Section 2, a kingly burial, royal preparations. The sheer scale of what happens next is just staggering. Nicodemus enters the picture and he brings 75 pounds of spices to prepare the body. 75 pounds. To put that massive number into perspective, Pastor Wilhoit notes that this amount was worth roughly 100 years of an average worker's wages. 100 years. It is a literal fortune, an entire lifetime of accumulated wealth, just poured out all at once. And look at exactly what Nicodemus brings, a mixture of aloes and myrrh. Myrrh is this highly expensive, fragrant resin, historically presented as a gift fit for royalty. The sermon draws a really beautiful full-circle connection right here. If you remember the Christmas story, the wise men brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh to Jesus at his birth. So Jesus is recognized with kingly gifts when he enters the world, and now he's given a royal, kingly burial as he leaves it. It's perfectly bookended. Moving on to Section 3, the new Adam's garden, womb of a new creation. Okay, this is where we zoom in on the deepest literary parallels of the text. The theological framework here relies heavily on the Apostle Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians 15, which contrasts the first Adam with Jesus. The first Adam, described as a man of dust, was given dominion as a king over creation, but he ultimately failed. Jesus, conversely, is framed in the theology as the last Adam, the man of heaven. He is the flawless new king who actually succeeds where the first one fell short. And this identity as the new Adam becomes completely impossible to ignore once we look at the specific scriptural clues in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 41. It reads, "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid." Pastor Wilhoit really emphasizes this point. A brand new tomb in a garden is essentially functioning as the womb of a new creation. Watch how this sermon just clicks these puzzle pieces together. In Genesis, humanity's story fractures when we are exiled from a garden. In John, the story of redemption entirely hinges on the new Adam being buried in a garden. Jesus is literally doing what we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. He is retracing the steps of humanity back to a garden, back to the original place of communion with God, to retrieve exactly what was lost. Let's tie it all together in Section 4, Creating the New Bride, Water and Blood. The absolute climax of these theological parallels lies in what happens while this new Adam is quote-unquote sleeping in this new tomb. It brilliantly illustrates the core metaphor. Just look at the striking narrative symmetry between Genesis and John. Step 1, the first Adam falls into a deep sleep, ordained by God. The new Adam, Jesus, dies and enters the sleep of death. Step 2, God opens the first Adam's side to take a rib. On the cross, a Roman soldier pierces the new Adam's side, and blood and water flow out. Step 3, from the first Adam's side, his bride, Eve, is created. And from the new Adam's side, through the symbolism of blood and water, the new bride, the Christian church, is created. It's literally a mirror image. The sermon solidifies this connection by pointing straight to Ephesians chapter 5, which discusses how Christ loved the church, his bride. It says he gave himself up for her that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. The water and blood flowing from Jesus' pierced side are directly linked to the theological concept of washing, cleansing, and purifying this new bride so that she can finally re-enter God's presence. To quickly summarize the theological framework we've been decoding today, you really just have to see how the first garden and the new garden parallel each other perfectly. You've got the location, the Garden of Eden versus the garden tomb. The state, a deep sleep versus death on the cross. And the ultimate result, the creation of Eve versus the creation of the church. It's a remarkable, almost mathematical, literary and theological symmetry. It frames Jesus not just as a savior, but as a total restorer of the original creation design. To bring all of this ancient text right into the present day, Pastor Wilhoit concludes his message with a really provocative challenge to his congregation. He asks them, if Jesus is the new king of this new garden, well, what parts of your own life have you marked as off-limits to him? He challenges folks to consider in what ways they're still trying to act like the old Adam, constructing and controlling their own little gardens, storing up their own treasures, relying solely on their own strength. It leaves us with an incredibly striking question to ponder. Are you letting the new king into the gardens of your life, or are you still holding on to the keys?